Hello my paint pouring friends. Today I have gotten a lot of questions about how to use a spinner. Now if you don't know what a spinner is, I have a cake decorating spinner that's made out of aluminum that a lot of people use. This is a 12-inch one. They have some that are just Lazy Susans that you can buy from IKEA or Walmart or places like that. There are some professional ones that other people sell, but they're all doing the same thing, and it's allowing us to spin our art while we pour, and also to help distribute the paint everywhere on our canvas evenly. However, it's not that easy to use. So today I'm going to show you a bunch of tips and tricks on how to use a spinner in an acrylic paint pour. So let's get to it. Okay, so first of all, what's a spinner? Spinners are generally made of two pieces, and they have a bearing of some sort in the middle to allow them to turn. So I have my base that's not going to move, and then I have my top that is going to move. There are a lot of different ones. I've made my own from hardware in Lowe's. I have used this one especially for the smaller paintings, the paintings that are less than 12 inches wide. And then there are some that are much bigger that other acrylic pouring artists sell, which I will link in the description below. Before you use a cake spinner, or before you use a spinner in general, there's a couple of things that I recommend. One, I like to cover my spinner. Now I just use press and seal because it's so easy. I take 2 sheets. It's nice and flat. It seals over the sides so I don't get any paint over the sides. Makes it really easy to clean up later. I just pull it off and throw it away, or use it until it is uneven, and then I pull it off and throw it away. But you could use tin foil, you could just use plastic wrap, you could use a paper bag that you just, like a Walmart bag, you can put over it and tie it on a side. Any of that will work as long as it doesn't interfere with the spinning portion. So, and again, I just put this maybe an inch over the side there, and it makes it a whole lot easier. The second thing you need is a way to attach your art to this. If I just have a random canvas on it and I spin it, the canvas may not stay. Now in this case, the canvas doesn't weigh anything, but if I had something that actually weighed a little bit and I spun it, it's just going to flip it off. So we need a way to attach the canvas to the surface. So one thing people do is they take just regular old tape. A tape that's a little bit thicker is better, I think. And you rip yourself off a piece, fold it into thirds on itself, and that makes a double-sided sticky side, and you can put it just right down on your canvas, right on your thing, and then that will keep it from moving away. You do want to do more than just one side. I would recommend all 4 sides if you have a canvas like this. If it's too tall, then the 2 sides. You can also use double-sided tape. I don't use this as much because I think it's harder to get up. This stuff is really easy. You just pull it and it comes right up. So, and that little bit of thickness doesn't do anything to the level as long as your spinner is level. Another thing you can do if you're using something like a tile is just put a little bit of your paint here and let this tile sit on that and let the paint be the glue. So again, we want to cover our painting, and then we want some way to attach our canvas or our painting surface to the spinner so it doesn't go flying off. All right, so with the spinner, you always want to know where the center of your spinner is. Now in this case, it actually has a little dot in the middle of this, where the center of the spinner is, that I can use as a reference, and it has some lines on the outside that I can use as a reference. So for example, if I have an 8x8 tile, I can make sure that each of the corners are overlapping the circle at the exact same place, and then I know that that's going to be about centered. If you don't have that, I definitely recommend, like if you got one of the plastic spinners from Amazon or IKEA or a wood one from there, that you actually mark underneath your cover to see where the center is, because the more centered your art piece is going to be, the better, the more evenly the paint is going to flow off as you spin it. Now there are some times when you don't want it centered, but we'll go over those in a minute, but you definitely want to know where the center is and a way to measure that. So maybe if I didn't have my lines on this, I might actually mark my center and then just mark, take a measuring, this isn't actually a measuring tape, but here I could mark an inch, all of this direction, and do the same thing all of this direction so I have an easy reference point for my art. But you can see I have little circles here, so I'm just going to mark them so you can see how that could potentially help you. So for normal painting, you want to center that here. I'm going to use a little piece of tape in the middle of my tile here. We're going to get this as center as I can get it. And just push that down so it's nice and secure. It's not going to go anywhere. Now, this is a 6x6 tile. Sorry, not an 8x8 tile. So I have a 6x6 tile. It's pretty well centered. And a lot of people use this setup for the Sheleeart blooms or Sheleeart swipes so they can pour their paint on and then once they've blown out their bloom to spin it. But you can use this with any pouring technique, and you can use it to gradually turn your art as you're pouring to give a little bit different look than if it were static and not moving anywhere. So either one of those works. Generally, you want to pour your paint into the middle and pour enough paint that it's going to cover everything, but you don't have to cover everything first and then spin it out. So I just want to show you that as an example here. I'm just going to use some cheap house paint to show this example. You know, a 6x6, that's 36 square inches, so I need about 2 ounces of paint to cover. So my paint here in the center. If you notice, the paint isn't quite centered, so what I would do is I would just move it over here to get it as centered as I could. And I'm just going to give it a slow spin because I want to show you what happens with just a little spin. So here's a slow spin. See how the paint is just barely kind of pushing its way out? So the reason this happens is because there's a force. When I spin, there's a force that's pulling the paint out toward the edges because the paint is liquid. The force is kind of pushing the paint outward, and it's doing it in a regular shape. So notice how my shape was elliptical before and my shape remains elliptical now because it's coming out at the exact same pace. If I spin it a little bit harder, now you see it expanding more, and it came over the edges here, 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 and here, but we still got a little ways here because again, this was an elliptical shape when that happened. If I can spin a little harder, ultimately it's going to cover all of my painting. Now, you absolutely can take some paint off the bottom and wet the edges so that paint has a better chance of moving there. Some people, when they put their paint down, they do that everywhere anyways, just so it gives it a nice slippery surface for the paint to move out. Otherwise, if I had a canvas here, a canvas is kind of rough, so the paint's not going to move near as fast on a rough surface as it is on a slick surface. And if it's a slick surface that also has a layer of paint, it's going to move faster. So again, the slower you do it, the slower the paint's going to move. The faster you do it, the faster it's going to move. Paint is going to spill off if you use too much, and it's going to flake. You can see I have used this spinner recently. I had all this paint that I cleaned up, but it can spin, and it can spin quite far. I've had splatters go 6, 8, 10 inches for this 12-inch table off to the side, so it depends on how quickly you move it. So let me show you with a little bit of color. I'm just going to use 2 colors for this. Just do a little bit of blue. And maybe a tad bit of gold. So those are about in the center. So if I spin this slowly, I'd expect it to gradually move. There's not a ton of paint, so there's not a lot of movement that it can make. But I expect it, so it's growing, but very, very slowly. Now if I do the same thing a little faster, see now it's growing, but it can only grow so much because there's only so much paint there. But see how evenly that grows? So now let me show you something a little bit different. I'm going to put some paint not in the center. I'll put some paint out here. And let's do the same thing. So now the force of my paint in the center is going to be even, but the force of this paint compared to this paint is actually going to be greater. So it's going to get pulled off faster than that. So it's going to kind of create a lane of paint, just like you see my white doing out here on the edge. So watch this. So this grew a little bit, but see how this kind of really shot out here? Because that piece of paint had more force and it got pulled directly straight out off of my spinner. So that's something you can use to your advantage if you want a piece to move in a certain way. What you do is you manipulate where that paint is. So let's do another. I'm going to take this blue again, right over this. Let's say I want 4 different colors of paint coming off of my blue. Now I'm not using any special paint here. This was actually leftover paint that dried a little bit. So I added a little bit of water to it. So it's a little bit thicker because it was the Sheleeart bloom paint. That the thicker paint's just going to move slower than the thinner blue that I have here. So now watch what happens here. So again, they're all moving out at about the same rate, but because I had extra paint, an extra puddle of paint here, that puddle is moving straight out in both cases. Just put down some more cheap white base paint. And then we're going to put some of these colors, but we're going to put them off center. I don't think this white will work because it dried up too much and I put water in it. And when you add water to these kind of paints, it doesn't mix as well, but we're going to try really quickly. Okay, so say I made my beautiful bloom here and it's off-centered. So when I do this, the bloom is not going to go past the center point. It's always going to go off to the side. So you can manipulate your paint. For example, if I want this to go that way, all I do is lift my, see how the paint is dripping? Go this way so my other camera gets it too. See how the paint is dripping down? Now it's going to be past center. Now if I do the exact same thing, I would expect this paint to move this way and this to continue to move this way. See how this slowly is moving out this way? Now there's not a lot of paint, so it doesn't have a lot of room to move, but that's why sometimes you see people pick up their blooms and move the weight of the paint or the puddle of the paint different directions so that when they spin it, the puddle is on one side or the other of the center point, so it gets pulled in that direction more. All right, so now I want to show you what happens when you have thick paint and thinner paint. So I have my blue here, which is a medium consistency. It's making a mound and then barely making a mound and going away. So this is thin paint. And then I have my bronze, which is very thick. Look, it's making a volcano, mound upon a mound upon a mound. So it is definitely thicker than the blue. So what I want to do here, we're going to load this back up. I didn't quite get it into the center, so let's center that a little bit. Okay, so now I have it mostly in the center, and I'm going to put about the same amount of each paint, about the same distance from the center. See how much thicker this is? And let's see what happens to the different thicknesses of paint. I'm just going to go slowly first. So right now they're opening up about the same way. And I want to explain why. They're opening up about the same way because the paint on top is actually just getting pulled by the white paint. But the faster I spin it or the longer I spin it, the more the blue is going to outpace the distance of the... So they're pretty close because I have that base layer here. Now watch what happens if I get rid of all of the base layer. So again, they were skating essentially on the same density or thickness of paint. So let's do that same thing. So this is much thicker. Because it's thicker, it's not going to open up as much, but it's about the same amount of paint. Now let's see what happens when I spin it a little bit. See, that is already opened up half again as much as this. See how much faster it's opening up? So the thinner your paint, the faster it's going to open up, the faster it's going to move. The thicker it is, the less it's going to move. So let's clear this off one more time. Now, when might you want to not have your paint directly in the center? Or when might you want to not have your pouring surface directly in the center? Got a bunch of buildup around here. Now it's getting on my fingers all over the place. So there are some times when you might want your painting to open up not evenly. You might want it to open up more toward this side or more toward this side. And there's a couple ways to do that. One, you could just pour over here and let it open up that way because that's where the paint, the weight of the paint is, and that's where it's gonna move from the center outward, always from the center outward. The second thing you could do is you can shift where your painting surface is in relation to the center of the, into the center of the spinner. So now what I've done is if I do that same type of thing, I'm going to put this still in the center of my spinner. I'm just going to try a couple of different colors here. I was not expecting that white to actually work, so we're going to try and do a traditional bloom here. All right. My blue is just so much thinner than the other colors that it overtook everything. But now I have a bloom that's in the center of my 6x6, but is not in the center of my spinner. And so I would expect the center of my spinner is about right here. So my expectation is this is going to open up like this, but this side is not going to open up hardly at all. Where these lines of paint are, it's not going to open up hardly at all because that's closer to the center. So let's see if my... So see how I've expanded all the way out that way, but I have not expanded right here where the center of my painting is. So I get way more movement out there and way less here because I moved my painting surface off center. If I spin it a little bit more, same thing. See how this all opened up, but this part didn't? So that's just another way. If you want to put If you always want to have the bloom start in the center but open up differently, you can either move the bloom itself from the center, or you can move your whole painting surface off of the center to give you that look. So another question I get is, what about spinning it to the left or spinning it to the right? And I probably am going to ruffle some feathers here, but it does not matter whether you spin to the left or spin to the right. The only thing that matters is how hard you spin, because that is what's creating the outward force. If you spin it left at 1 foot per second, it's going to push the paint out exactly the same as if you spin right 1 foot per second. It does not matter. And that's just a physics thing, how the centrifugal and centripetal force is happening here. It's always going to be from the center of the spin outward, and it's going to be straight outward. It's not going to be different depending on which direction you go. Now, if you're having trouble with the consistency of your paint, either for the Sheleeart bloom technique or for any other technique, I would highly recommend that you watch the video on screen now. Or if you want to do the Sheleeart blooms like I've been attempting to do here, here is a video specifically for that.